Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Kevin Levingston. In our continuing analysis of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OB3, this episode will focus on the new law's impact on the IRS and what that may mean to you. Joining me to talk through this are Nikole Flax and Alexis MacIvor. Nikole, Alexis, welcome.
Thank you.
Nikole, I'll start with you. As we learned from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, another very sweeping bill, with a bill like that, it can have a very big impact on the guidance process as well as on the IRS. What do you anticipate will be the impact on the IRS's responsibilities here, and how big of a burden will it be?
Sure. So the IRS obviously has a pretty big lift with the implementing the legislation, There are broad-ranging provisions, as you have seen from these shows. It's not, you can't even just talk about all of tax in one conversation. So there are business provisions, international provisions, there are some continuing provisions, provisions that were extended, there are brand new provisions, and it is a significant lift for the IRS. Given the IRS's systems and how they just have to do things, it's a multifaceted approach. So it takes expertise and the subject matter experts, it takes parts of the organization that works on forms and pubs, and there is a significant lift in the IT part of the organization. So it really is a coordinated effort. The IRS is used to doing this, though. I mean, we've had a lot of tax legislation in recent years, and it really becomes a kind of on all hands on deck exercise where you have to take, some of the best people from all throughout the IRS and to really have them focused on an intense effort to get it done.
Yeah, sounds pretty intense. Well, what about the budget cuts and the staffing cuts there? How is that going to impact all of this, getting the work done around OB3, as well as other regulatory guidance that isn't OB3 related?
So there's obviously been a lot of cut at IRS, both a lot of loss in senior positions, as well as just throughout the workforce. I think the most important thing with legislation implementation is you need individuals who are familiar with how to do it.
Yep.
There's obviously a lot of time pressure to get things done. There's prioritization to figure out what calls need to be made earlier on, what calls can wait, what things taxpayers will need information on sooner rather than later. And really identifying what IT needs to know early in the process, because in a normal time frame, even if there weren't tax law changes, this time of year, IT would be getting ready for the next filing season. So there's just not a lot of room to take your time to do it. So I think probably the biggest challenge will be the loss of expertise of folks who have a lot of experience in doing this. But as we see, the Treasury Secretary is acting as the IRS Commissioner right now. And implementation is obviously a big priority for this administration. So I think they will get it done. And, it just might be a little more difficult than traditional times where there were more people around who could, come to the table and had some of that historical expertise of how to do it.
Got it. Thank you. Alexis, turning to you, you spent several years at IRS Chief Counsel. As it relates to the regular writing process, it's typically IRS Chief Counsel as well as the Treasury Office of Tax Policy. What are their respective roles and responsibility? How does that kind of get delineated? And really, how do they prioritize guidance?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So to start to think about the Treasury, particularly the Office of Tax Policy, is responsible for developing and implementing tax policy. On the Chief Counsel side, they're administering and interpreting the tax law. So how does that all work together when you're implementing a large bill like OB3? They're looking at each provision. They're getting the technical experts. They're talking to the IRS and determining what needs to be done to implement that particular provision. Do they need changes to forms? Do we need new forms? Is there an uncertainty or clarification that's needed? Is guidance needed? And then comes what type of guidance? And guidance can come in many different forms, as we see at regulations, proposed regulations, IRB guidance, like revenue rulings, revenue procedures, and notices.
Sure.
You can also have information on the IRS website. FAQs. It can also come in the form of forms and instructions to the forms. So all of these things are being taken into account to figure out what needs to be done to implement the bill. And I'll add timing is another element. What tax year? When do the taxpayers need that information? What is the implementation stage? And how many taxpayers does it impact? Add on top of that the administration's priorities. So if the administration has a particular priority when they're administering the new bill, that will likely be a higher priority than anything else. So you put all of this information together, and then Chief Counsel works with Treasury to prioritize their resources and figure out what needs to get done first.
And going back to you, Nikole. So there have been a slew of executive orders that have come out since Inauguration Day, many that impact broad regulatory guidance, not just within the tax space. How do you anticipate it'll impact the flow of guidance and more generally as it relates to OB3?
I think that's a really interesting question, because when you look at the executive order that came out in February, it appears to be premised on a notion that guidance is burdensome for taxpayers, for citizens, and that the government should work to streamline that. There are factors that are present that all agencies need to look at in implementing guidance. One, I think the one that jumps out is it needs to be the best read of the statute.
Yeah.
When you have a situation like this, where you have an administration who was very involved in getting legislation enacted, and then you have the same administration working on the guidance, I think generally they view their read as the best read of the statute. And so I don't know if it imposes a different lens than it normally would. There's been a lot of talk of, before there's new guidance that can be issued, they have to pull some old guidance off the shelf. And there have been a number of suggestions of how that could happen. But it's often the case when legislation is enacted, taxpayers really need quick answers on a number of things. And that's, it's generally things they're asking for. Like, they want the certainty that they can rely on the government's view. And so I think it will be interesting to see how it plays out. We're seeing with TCJA, there were a number of positions that the government took that taxpayers don't agree with as the best read of the statute. And so those are kind of later in the process, and we're seeing how the executive orders kind of impact that. But I think here it'll be a longer term lens to see how that actually played out, because I think the folks who are involved in getting legislation enacted, I think they generally view their read of the statute as the best read, because they were pretty close to it, moving through.
Alexis, maybe back to you to finish us off. In terms of taxpayers, many are very interested with the OB3 guidance and being able to weigh in on that. Any recommendations for how they should go about doing that as Treasury and IRS Chief Counsel go through the process of considering guidance?
I would say, as soon as taxpayers see this information where it's not clear how they're going to implement OB3, and they're looking for guidance from Treasury or the IRS, I think they should reach out sooner rather than later.
So don't wait for something to
don't wait for something, because I think when you're in a position at Chief Counsel or Treasury, you're trying to prioritize all of these different issues, and you see it through one lens, and taxpayers are looking at it through a slightly different lens. They're looking at how they're going to move from their books and their records and put it on their tax return.
Sure.
And what those issues are. And that's not always the same lens that Chief Counsel and Treasury is looking at initially. So having taxpayers come in and say, here are the issues that we're dealing with, here are how we would administer it if we were doing it today, and providing that information is incredibly valuable from a position at Chief Counsel or Treasury.
Yeah, and just to add, there are a couple provisions in the bill that create current filing questions that it's unclear if the government's aware of that yet. And you wouldn't know it unless you're like real time dealing with the provisions. They're written in a way that you think it's not a real time issue, but it is. And so those are the kinds of things that I think it's helpful to raise those to the government now. And I think they are working to give clarity where they can.
So with that, would you actually recommend someone go into Chief Counsel, go into, call it the commissioner's side, as well as go into Treasury Office of Tax Policy, or what?
I think it depends what the nature of the issue is. I mean, I think on a filing type issue where the statute is clear with respect to what you're able to do, but the form doesn't seem to fit. That to me is an IRS side type question.
Yeah.
With respect to more of a legal call, I would go to counsel or Treasury.
Got it.
But I think you could go to anyone and they'll get you to the right person. It's just raising the issue and noting it. And then as this process goes along, there are going to be additional opportunities for taxpayers to weigh in, whether it's FAQs on the website, clearly with notices of proposed rulemaking, with proposed regulations. There are ample time to weigh in and to provide guidance and information to Treasury and Chief Counsel.
Thank you both very much for being here today.
Sure.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and other developments. Take care.